I want to follow up on something I sort of started talking about last week. Last week, during the notable Reddit discussion story, there was a post I mentioned on our subreddit called, "Is the left taking anti-Semitism seriously enough?" And there's actually a bigger specific story here, which is that of Louis Farrakhan's involvement in the Women's March. The Women's March has been a remarkable example of activism in the Trump era. Even if I've had specific criticisms of some particular marches in the past, the political engagement that Trump has catalyzed is great. Of course, assuming it leads to voter turnout increases in 2018 and it moves the needle in terms of getting these right-wing nuts out of elected office. But the Women's March big picture is a really great thing, despite my sort of micro criticisms of it. But the Women's March has some major problems. And one of those problems is something that I've identified among a strain of the left for a long time. And to put it in the most charitable terms, it's the indifference to extremely anti-Semitic elements in their ranks. Many of the Women's March leaders are directly connected to one of the most notorious anti-Semites in American culture from the last several decades, and that is the leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan. And this guy is undoubtedly a massive anti-Semite, a disgusting and vile Jew hater. Both the Anti-Defamation League and the Simon Wiesenthal Center are unequivocal on this. And it's not a new thing, right? You go back to 1985, and Farrakhan said of the Jews, "And don't you forget, when it's God who puts you in the ovens, it's forever." Skip ahead 30 years to March of 2015. Farrakhan accused Jews of being involved in the September 11th attacks. Farrakhan has called Adolf Hitler a very great man. In his speech last month, he described the powerful Jews as his enemy, and he actually sort of looked back nostalgically at the anti-Jewish statements of President Richard Nixon and the Reverend Billy Graham, who recently passed away. It's a very, very long list, and the Nation of Islam is an organization which he leads, and it's all just filled with rampant anti-Semitism. There's no denying that. And three of the women involved at the top level of the Women's March are directly tied to Farrakhan: Linda Sarsour, Carmen Perez, and Tamika Mallory. And I have said for years that anti-Semitism is a blind spot for some left-wing activists. And this came to a head last week when Farrakhan, as I mentioned, spoke at the Nation of Islam's Savior's Day. And he again talked about satanic Jews, saying when you want something in this world, the Jews hold the door, white folks are going down, and Satan is going down. And Farrakhan, by God's grace, has pulled the cover off of that satanic Jew. And I'm here to say your time is up. This is the anti-Semitism and the straight-up racist nonsense that this guy has been perpetrating for decades. Anyone with actual progressive values or any Western liberal values whatsoever should condemn it, and it should have, the Women's March should have nothing to do whatsoever with Louis Farrakhan or with his organization, the Nation of Islam. But this is barely registering with some of these so-called leftists. Some examples: Tamika Mallory recently asked about Farrakhan's statements, and here's what she came up with on Twitter. "The black community is very complex. We have been and continue to suffer through incomparable circumstances. This means other people may not understand how we organize and all that it takes to deal with our pain. I am dedicated to bringing people together. However, I will not be bullied," presumably into denouncing Louis Farrakhan. So we have to understand that part of the black community dealing with its trauma is to accept an insatiable and violent Jew hater like Louis Farrakhan. Jew hatred from Louis Farrakhan is necessary to work through the injustices that have been perpetrated on the African-American community. That's not my flavor of the left. It never will be, and I'm sorry if that angers you. I mentioned Carmen Perez. She was asked about Louis Farrakhan and his connection to the Women's March, and she said, "In regards to Minister Farrakhan, I think that is a distraction. People need to understand the significant contributions that these individuals have made to black and brown people. There are no perfect leaders. We follow the legacy of Dr. King, which is Kingian nonviolence. We say we have to attack the forces of evil, not the people doing evil. We never attack people." Well, then it sounds like Louis Farrakhan's ideas are merely not compatible with the ideas that you're claiming to follow. And you should make that clear and show that that level of hatred has no place at the Women's March. To say that Farrakhan is a distraction is just not adequate. How can we on the left correctly criticize the alt-right for their ties to and their indifference to ties to white nationalists without denouncing and ostracizing and alienating someone like Louis Farrakhan, who makes statements that are very similar to the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories we hear from the alt-right? When on the right they admire Hitler, we say, oh, that's a discrediting point of view. Yet we have someone on the supposed left in Louis Farrakhan who said Hitler was great, and you have the leaders of the Women's March refusing to denounce him and his connection to the march. That's not a part of the left that I'm ever going to be a part of. Now, I know that the reaction to this commentary, I'm ready for it. I'm going to get emails from people saying, David, you're ignoring the good things Farrakhan has done for the African-American community. That will be a sort of lighter criticism. I will be called a white supremacist, or I will be called misogynistic or racist because I am telling women what they, quote, should do. That is absolutely ridiculous. That is the exact type of attempt to silence someone based on identity that the left is supposed to be against. And if these Women's March leaders were tied to someone who had made equivalent comments to Farrakhan's about black people, about Hispanic people, about foreigners or the disabled or whatever group of people, this would not be accepted. But that's exactly why we need to make sure that this blind spot for anti-Semitism on the left is not ignored. That's what I'm doing. And you know what? I'm ready. I'm ready for the comments I'm going to get from people saying, David, you don't have a right to say that. What you're saying is white supremacist. What you're saying is misogynistic. No, what I'm saying is Louis Farrakhan is a disgusting anti-Semite, and no one on the left who is looking to create a movement that is respected should have any association with this guy whatsoever. Those are the facts. And if you want to try to discredit me based on my identity, I'm ready for it. I'm not going to be surprised, but I don't really think that that's an argument. Today's program is sponsored in part by Blinkist. The entire idea behind Blinkist and the service they provide is perfect for me. And I assume really great for a lot of people in our audience too. If you watch this show, you know I read a lot of nonfiction books. And Blinkist is an app that takes nonfiction books and it distills the most important points and insights from the book down to a powerful package of information, which can be read or listened to in about 15 minutes on your mobile device or tablet. You can zip through books really quickly. I still think it's great to absorb the wisdom of books by reading them slowly and in their entirety. Deep reading is what it's called. But not everybody. I know I don't have the time to read all the nonfiction books that I really want to. So for the ones I can't read, Blinkist is the next best thing. Huge selection for one low flat rate. You get access to thousands of books. You can switch between text and audio, both online and offline. And you also get personalized recommendations based on books you've already chosen. Join over 4 million people already using Blinkist. It made the iTunes Best Apps of 2017 list. It's free to try, but you can also get a 20% discount on a yearly membership by visiting Blinkist.com/Pakman. If you're watching on YouTube, we've put a link in the description underneath the video. Again, that's Blinkist.com/PAKMAN.